Welcome back. Let's go on the Cloudera Quick Start VM tour together. I'll be your guide. So if you download and open up your virtual machine, once the launch of the Cloudera Quick Start happens, you're going to see a screen kind of like this. What we're going to do now is we're going to go inside this VM and see what kind of services and utilities does this virtual machine provide us. So when you first start, you're going to see that there is a browser inside something that looks like a desktop, and there's a little welcome page inside that browser. We're going to be exploring this browser, opening up additional tabs, and going through numerous different services to learn more about this environment. So if you look at inside these browsers, you can see that here across you have several different services. Cloudera, first Cloudera one will take you just to the web page, but then you have Hue, you have Hadoop, HBase, Impala, Spark, Uzi, etc. These are all these applications we just mentioned and learned about in our previous lecture, and let's go through and click through them to see what do they allow us and provide us. So let's click on the Hadoop first. You can either open a new tab and open it in there, or you can just click on it in this same tab. What we can see here is an overview of our Hadoop stack. We can see when the particular instantiation of the stack has happened. We can see which version of the software we have. It gives us the entire summary of all of the configurations, of the security, of number of files used, etc. Since we have downloaded this VM from Cloudera, it already comes preloaded with a number of different files that we're going to use through our exercises and tutorials. So we already have a number of different files and storage taken up. So let's click on the data nodes next. We have mentioned data nodes a little bit earlier in terms of HDFS and the storage system underneath. So this particular service will allow us to look at all of the data nodes that we have, and once we start running jobs, we're going to be able to see what these data nodes have and the summary of all of the things loaded into the nodes. Next up, let's click on HBase. As we have mentioned earlier, HBase is a columnar data store that will store our unstructured data within the Hadoop file system. It will show us here the number of requests as we make to read and write into this HBase, and we can see all the different kinds of calls and tasks that have been submitted to the database. Right now we don't have any because we haven't launched any tasks, but as we go through the tutorial, we're going to come back to this and look at the summaries of jobs submitted. We have mentioned Impala earlier, and we said that Impala allows us to submit some really high-performance SQL-like queries to our data stored into HDFS. And you can see here that once we start submitting these jobs, we're going to be able to look at the last 25 completed queries. We can look at the queries that are happening right now. We can look at the different locations, the different fragments that these queries have been submitted to. Next, let's click on Uzi. If we go to Uzi, we can see a number of different jobs submitted, when they were started and ended, how large they were, etc. Once we're submitting the jobs, we're going to come back here and look at more in more details in all of these different applications and services provided to us on top of the Hadoop framework. So right now, let's go back to the original web page, our little welcome Cloudera Live welcome page within the browser, and let's start the tutorial. Click on Start Tutorial. So the tutorial will offer us an introduction to the Cloudera's live tutorial, and you can see that within this quick VM, we're going to be able to run a number of different jobs within the tutorial, and we're going to be able to understand how some of these tools within the Cloudera VM work. We're going to understand how to set up and execute a number of different business intelligence and analytics use cases, and we're going to be able to explain to other people in our team how these particular services work. So let's click on Getting Started. This will take us to another page where we can This will take us to another page where we can define a business question we're trying to answer for this particular tutorial. In this particular tutorial, we're going to imagine that we have a corporation called DataCo, and we have a mission to help our organization get better insight from its data and answer some bigger questions. So our first scenario for this part of the tutorial will be taking the idea of big data and gaining more insight. Can we actually get some data into the database and do some simple analytics on a large amount of data? So in this specific first scenario, DataCo's business question is, what products do our customers like to buy? The answer to this question is, the first thought might be to look at the transaction data, and maybe that would indicate what customers actually buy and what they would like to buy, right? Well, this is probably something that you would do in your regular job daily, possibly, and you're probably going back to your RDBMS environment and trying to submit some SQL language in order to try and answer this question. The benefit of the Hadoop platform is that now you can do this at a greater scale, at a less cost, and you might be able to use the same system and the same data to answer some additional questions and do some additional analytics on this data. So what this data exercise will demonstrate is how to exactly do that same thing, but within the environment, and use some of the seamless integration that's available to us within this VM. So here on the sidebar, you can learn more about Scoop. We talked about Scoop in our previous lecture, and it's a tool that uses MapReduce to transfer data between Hadoop cluster and the relational database very efficiently. So if you remember, Scoop stands for SQL to Hadoop. It works by spawning tasks on multiple data nodes to download various portions of the data in parallel, so you can do it faster. And when you're finished, each piece of data is replicated to ensure reliability and spread out across the cluster to ensure you can process data in parallel on the cluster. There is actually two versions of Scoop included in Cloudera's platform. Scoop 1 is a thick client and is what we're going to be using in this tutorial. The commands we're going to run directly submit MapReduce jobs to transfer this data. Scoop 2 consists of the central server that submits the MapReduce jobs on behalf of its clients, and it's a much lighter weight client that you might use to connect to the server. So on this page, we can see what the table structure is for the data we're bringing in. And in order to analyze the transactional data in this new platform, we're going to need to ingest this data into HDFS. We have already found the Scoop is probably our best tool for this job, and we're going to take data from our relational MySQL database and load it up into HDFS. With a few additional configuration parameters, we can take this step further and load this relational data directly into a form ready to be queried by Impala. And in order to do that, we may want to leverage the power of something called Apache Avro, which we haven't mentioned too much so far, but it really is a specific file format for other workflows on the Hadoop cluster. It's specifically optimized to work really well on the Hadoop platform. So let's scroll down through this page and make sure we read the rest of our instructions. And now we're going to try and open a terminal, which we can do by clicking on this little dark square, which is supposed to indicate a terminal. And by clicking on this, we're going to open up a new window with a Cloudera prompt inside the terminal. Within your tutorial, you have this little button that says copy. This particular button will copy the code inside the window, and then we can take that code and paste it into the Cloudera's terminal window. Our first task is to copy the scoop command in order to launch the scoop job for moving this data. So we're going to take this data, and in order to paste it into a terminal window, you can either click right on top of the terminal window under the Edit and Paste, or you can just use the Shift-Control-V command if that is easier for you. We're going to paste this command into the terminal, and this command might take a little while to complete, but it is doing a lot of things. It is launching MapReduce job to export the data from MySQL database and put those export files into the Avro format into the HDFS. It is also creating the Avro schema so then we can easily load our Hive tables and use it for querying inside the Impala later. So in order to confirm that our Avro data files exist in HDFS, we're going to copy the next command into the terminal. And note that the schema and the data are stored in separate files. The schema is only applied to the data when the data is queried. And this is what we call the schema on read. If you remember, we mentioned that in our previous class. This gives you the flexibility to query the data with SQL while it's still in a format usable by other systems as well. This is in contrast to the traditional databases that require you to have this schema well defined before entering any data into it. And at this point, we have already imported a lot of data and will now just specify how its structure should be interpreted. So since we're going to want to use the Apache Hive, we will need the schema files as well. So let's copy that into HDFS where Hive can easily access them. Now that we have the data, we can prepare it to be queried. We're going to do this in the next section using Impala, but you might have noticed that we have imported this data into Hive directories at this point of time. Hive and Impala both read their data from file in HDFS, and they even share metadata about the table. The only difference is that Hive executes queries by compiling them to MapReduce jobs, and as you will see later, this means that it can be more flexible, but typically slower, while Impala is a parallel query system engine, and we call that massively parallel queries, that reads the data directly from the file system itself and then allows itself to execute queries very fast in the more of an interactive and exploration kind of a mode. Now that you've gone through the first steps to scoop the data into HDFS, we have transformed it into Avro file format. Now we're going to import the schema files and start using the schema by querying the data inside it. So let's click onto our next step. Let's take the next step and click onto the tutorial exercise 1. We're going to use Hue, which is Impala's application to create the metadata for our tables. We're going to create that metadata, and then we're going to query our tables through the Hue environment. Hue is really nice because it provides a web-based interface for many of the tools in our Cloudera Hadoop virtual machine, and it can be found under the master node, which you can see here. In order to log into the Hue, we're going to type in Cloudera for both username and password in order to enter the system. Once inside the Hue, we're going to click on the Impala query editors, on the query editors, and click on the Impala underneath there. We're going to copy and paste the code that will create the tables. And then we're going to go back and first delete the queries we just wrote down for creation of the tables. We're going to empty out and clean out this query. They're inside the editor. And then I'm going to copy the command called show tables. This command will show us all of the tables we have just created in the window below it. Now that Now that our transaction data is readily available for structured queries, it's time to actually start addressing the question we asked earlier at the beginning of our tutorial. Our business question was, can we find out some of the products that our customers are interested in buying? So we're going to copy and paste the standard SQL example queries there in our tutorials, and we're going to look into what kinds of products are showing. We're going to look into total revenue per product and look at the top 10 revenue generating products. Now we have learned how to create the query tables using Impala. And we have learned how to use regular interfaces and tools like the terminal and interfaces within the Hadoop environment. The idea here is to take this data and start creating some interesting reports that can provide us a better insight into the data we have and understand how the traditional system and the Hadoop system do similar things in different ways. And understand how the Hadoop system provides us with much larger scale, but still offers a lot of flexibility.